And welcome to the Gay Liberation Network here on Chicago Access Network Television. My name is Andy Thayer, and with us tonight is Mario Venegas, who is from the Illinois Coalition Against Torture and any number of other organizations. There's the Chicago Coalition to close down Guantanamo and many other organizations. And the reason why we're talking about the Guantanamo prison tonight is because today is the 12th anniversary of the opening of the Guantanamo prison. This was a prison which was established on Cuban territory on illegally held U.S. Occupied portion of Cuba. And the Bush administration 12 years ago used the opportunity to set up this prison on Cuban territory so that it would not have its prisoners subject to U.S. law, the right to have a trial, and so forth. And President Obama, of course, made the promise right on the second day of his term, I believe, to close down the Guantanamo prison. And yet, to this day, Guantanamo prison is still open. Over 150 prisoners are still held there. Nearly a half of them have been cleared, supposedly, for release, that they supposedly don't represent any threat to the United States, and yet the Obama administration has continued to hold them. Mario himself is not only an authority on the problems of torture at Guantanamo and elsewhere, he is himself a torture survivor. He was a supporter of democracy in Chile back at the time of the 1973 coup, and as a result of his support for democracy in Chile, was tortured himself. Mario, it's an honor and it's a pleasure to have you on our program tonight. You have continued fighting for human rights. Tell us, if you could, why you were involved. There was an event today at the Federal Building. There's an event tomorrow night. Why is it, do you think it's important to be raising the issue of Guantanamo and the prison there?
First, thank you for having me here in the program representing Illinois Coalition Against Torture, ICAT, as well as part of that coalition in Chicago to shut down Guantanamo. The event that we were just a few hours before there downtown was a vigil to call the attention of people, to inform, to educate people that are passing by there. Through flyers, through today we have these kind of lights saying close Guantanamo, Jitmo, and we have the people wearing their orange suit and their hood, the same thing as resembling what happened in Guantanamo with the prisoners there. And 12 years, we said too many, has been this prison open, this detention, I would call it concentration camp war. And so that's why we were here today. But we have been since April, every single Friday, with these vigils, bringing information and updating people about what's going on in Guantanamo. Because most people we have seen there, they don't even know what's going on in Guantanamo. They don't even know that Guantanamo is a concentration camp where they have people from all over the world, mainly from the countries where we are in struggle, or the government has a war there. So that's the main reason, and we are demanding to President Obama to close down Guantanamo. President Obama, as you said, the second day in office on his first term, he said no more torture in this country and Guantanamo will have to be closed. Unfortunately, 12 years later, Guantanamo is still open, and unfortunately still people being tortured there. And he had a second approach saying Guantanamo had to be closed. This was about 231 days ago, and here we are, still with Guantanamo open, still with people that are being detained there, people that are not being tried, people that have been ordered to be released already, even by the previous administration, and they're still there. There had been some progress in terms of the new the new law that has been passed in Congress in terms of ability for people that for the government to release or not release but to transfer prisoners to different countries, lifting up certain amendments that were in that law before that they couldn't even transfer people, they couldn't even release.
Yeah.
And
if I could interject for a second, I think it's important to remind our listeners precisely what President Obama said in a 2007 campaign speech. He said, "We're going to close Guantanamo and we're going to restore habeas corpus. We're going to lead by example, not just by word, but by deed. That's our vision for the future." And he also said that when he got into office, he would order his Attorney General to, quote-unquote, immediately review, end quote, any evidence of criminality on the part of Bush administration figures because, quote, nobody is above the law. And then, of course, he got into office, and the first thing that he started doing was saying, oh, we're not going to look back to the past. And that's where things stand right now.
Even more, let me add something
Yes.
there, because President Obama, in his own words, last year, he said Guantanamo is not necessary to keep America safe. He said, adding, it's expensive, it is inefficient, it hurts us in terms of our international standing, it lessens cooperation with our allies on counterterrorism effort, it is a recruitment tool for the extremists, it needs to be closed. I mean, with those kind of remarks, and still he has Guantanamo open.
And there's a Chicago angle to this because it's important to remember that our own now mayor, Rahm Emanuel, was chief of staff during this time
Correct.
when all these promises were begun to be broken. Would like to just take a quick little break here to let you know about a few announcements before we resume our conversation. Again, you're watching the Gay Liberation Network here on CAN TV, and that's our website there on the screen. Please visit it to find out other things that we're up to. And there's going to be an important event coming up a little later this month on the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday weekend on Sunday, January 19th, 2:30 to 4:30 p.m. There's going to be a Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration and public meeting entitled Hope in an Age of Crisis, Reclaiming Dr. King's Radical Vision for Economic Equality. Certainly an important topic in these days of people's pensions being attacked, people's living standards being attacked, to come out to that event on, again, Sunday, January 19th at St. Michael the Archangel Catholic Church at 8235 South Shore Drive in Chicago. But more immediately, I'd like to point out that there's an event tomorrow night that our Mario is going to be speaking at, along with a few other important speakers. Candace Gorman, who's the attorney for two of the Guantanamo prisoners, one of whom has been released, and another person, Dr. Antonio Martinez, who's with the Institute for Survivors of Torture and Human Rights Abuses, and that event is going to be tomorrow night, 6:30, 9:30 p.m. at 637 South Dearborn Street. There's no admission charge, so please make your way out to that event. We'll be putting this information up on the screen a little bit later. Before we go on with our conversation with Mario, though, I'd like to point out a few websites you can take a look at to get some more information. www.closeguantanamo.org, www.illinoiscat.org, that's for the Coalition Against Torture, and an individual activist, Andy Worthington, in the United Kingdom, whom Mario strongly advises as a great expert on these subjects. So we'll get that information up on the screen a little bit later, just before we close out the show tonight, but wanted to make you aware of it. But one of the things that is, I think, so frustrating about this issue is it's so blatantly illegal for anyone to commit torture, and yet you've got Donald Rumsfeld, who hails here from Illinois, former defense secretary, who was sued several times by former prisoners, including people who were held incommunicado, including some U.S. citizens. And they've managed to go scot-free. And what the Obama administration said about people like this, including the attorneys who signed off on the torture by the CIA and so forth, was that so long as they had comported with a torture regime that was set up by the attorneys, by people like John Yoo, then they would not be prosecuted. But what we found is that even people that did not follow those permission slips for torture were let off the hook as well. And there have been more than 100 people who have died in U.S. detention, apparently due to torture. And that's not even counting, of course, the so-called non-lethal torture, things like waterboarding that was used during the Spanish Inquisition and has been recognized literally for centuries as a form of torture. What do you think about that, Mario?
Well, I think that the issue of torture in this country started being acknowledged by people after we saw those pictures in the newspapers from Abu Ghraib in Iraq. And was the first, I think, issue that people start thinking about, because most of the time people thought that, well, torture is something inflicted in countries like those underdeveloped countries in Africa and South America, but never here in this country. We have never been responsible for exporting torture techniques even to some countries. And I think that was a big point, and we started a huge campaign against torture here in this country with different human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and we create here in Chicago the Illinois Coalition Against Torture, just precisely to educate people about, to inform people about what torture is in this country really. Because, I mean, still people don't believe that we have a system. It's not just something that happened by chance. It's a system that you torture people, not just in Guantanamo, but also you have it in different detention centers, even more today, detention centers where they have immigrants. They have immigrants here that have been, they are going to be deported, that they have them in different centers where they even torture them. Because when we talk about torture, it's not just people think about electricity or, punching people, but we have isolation confinement, which is a big deal here in all prisons in the United States, as well, obviously, in Guantanamo. And people that have been detained and have been staying there in isolation confinement for even more than 20 years. We have the case here in Chicago, where the time of John Birch, commander of the police, who sent people to prison being innocent, and those people stay there for more than 20 years. There are still people there from the 80s that are being detained and have been tortured, and people that have been in isolation confinement. I know, and also waterboarding. I mean, something I suffered myself. Waterboarding, isolation confinement, I can tell you, those are torture techniques that are used by the military, in our case in Chile, and everywhere around in the world, sponsored by the U.S. government, which is something that people can't believe, but is real. I mean, that's one of the big things that people have to be aware of.
And these so-called black sites, these where prisoners, they use so-called extraordinary rendition to literally kidnap people in foreign countries and held them in a number of Eastern European countries and flew them through Western European countries as well. One of the great ironies of the past year, when the United States was threatening to bomb Syria for human rights abuses, was that, of course, the United States had no problem using extraordinary rendition to kidnap people and send them to Saddam Hussein, Assad's seniors' prisons to have horrible tortures done upon them. And this was done, of course, not only in Syria, but in U.S. ally Egypt and U.S. ally Libya, but only when person is a foreign leader is opposed to the United States, does the United States begin to recognize that there might be some human rights problems there? In fact, while there hasn't been a real thoroughgoing investigation in this country of the tortures during the Bush administration and the continuing tortures afterwards, we know, thanks to WikiLeaks and Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, that the United States, the Obama administration, went full force to try to prevent European countries from conducting their own investigations. And we only know this thanks to WikiLeaks and Chelsea Manning. But of course, the Obama administration shoots the messenger and prosecutes people like Chelsea. Now, we do have a caller. Caller, you're welcome to make a short question or comment.
Yes, with regard to conflating the issues involving LGBT community and torture, I certainly would agree with you. I think that the United States does a disservice to itself. I think it's counterproductive to torture persons. I don't think that there's much evidence that it has yielded usable intelligence. Having said that, I think it's fair to say that there are probably a great many people who are of the LGBT community who would resent the notion of using this platform that you're using to oppose something that they have nothing against. They support LGBT rights, but this has nothing to do with LGBT community. This is a completely separate issue. So the question is...
I'll address that in a second, if that's your question, sir. Well, actually, it has everything to do, because if you're for justice, by which you mean simply just us, and you're not for everyone's right to to exercise their right to assemble, their right to free speech, their right to live their lives without torture or other oppression, well, then you're not deserving of justice for yourselves. In fact, one thing that led to the dynamism of the early gay liberation movement in the early 70s and late 60s was that LGBT activists not only were active around issues of justice for LGBTs, but justice for everyone, whether it was for immigrants, whether it was against racism, whether it was against war, that you cannot in good conscience ask others who are non-LGBT to support, whether it's equal marriage rights or equal employment rights or what have you, if you are not yourself arguing in favor of rights for others and actually doing something about it, not just talking about it. And so we in the Gay Liberation Network, yes, we focus primarily on LGBT issues, but from time to time we take up issues of torture, we take up issues of war, we take up issues of economic deprivation, not unlike Martin Luther King on a far more grand and important scale, when he saw that the issue of fighting for justice for African Americans wasn't just an issue of opposing racial segregation, but dealing with issues of economic devastation of the African American community, dealing with issues like the Vietnam War. And that was a great advance. So I would take great issue with our caller.
And let me add something there which is important. I think when I was talking about exporting torture techniques to other countries, we have been really having now in Honduras, for instance,
yes,
where a big delegation went there to see how the LGBT community had been attacked, had been killed, had been assassinated.
I was on that delegation.
Yeah, you were there and in that delegation. And I think that's important to know that, I mean, when I talk about exporting torture, people that are in Honduras are being trained in the School of the Americas in Georgia, where this is a big school that train on techniques of interrogation and torturing people, and they are working, those officers bringing from those countries, going back to their own countries to torture people. In this case, in Honduras, we have a big issue today with LGBT community that have been attacked, been assassinated, even killed, and may disappear. So that's the important thing why we should care about also this community.
And LGBTs in Honduras know it's not just them who are being attacked. It's campesinos, it's trade
Right.
unionists, it's human rights workers, and so they recognize, yes, we're going to fight for LGBT rights in Honduras, but we're also going to defend campesinos and unionists and
Exactly.
others who are attacked by the same forces.
Exactly.
So, and to not have that kind of cross-fertilization of issues it would be foolish.
And
But we-
LGBT and African Americans and immigrants, Latinos are all part of the community. So we should take care about all these sections of the community in terms of denouncing when they are being affected by this issue of torture.
I do believe we've got another caller. Well, okay, he's had his chance, so we'll move on. Now, one issue I think that's important to take up, Mario, and wish you'd discuss is what does this, the failure of the Obama administration to close Guantanamo, are there things that they could do to close it right now, in your opinion?
Well, I think that we have been discussing this at length, that normally Obama make these announcements about closing Guantanamo, but President Obama always blamed Congress about this. And Congress would blame President Obama. So, they're throwing the ball to each other there. Who is responsible for this?
Well, for the first couple of years, Obama's
Exactly.
party controlled
Exactly.
Congress.
So, and we know for the fact that President Obama, he can have an executive order to make a decision to say, we close Guantanamo now, today, not tomorrow, today. But he is not having the political will, I think, to do it because of the opposition, because of the big business that they're developing there in the camp where Guantanamo is, which is, everyone knows about all these corporations that are profiting about these detention centers, etc. So there's a number of issues there that why I think he's not closing Guantanamo or the administration general. Even more that even the former general that was the first general there has been telling we have to close Guantanamo. But nothing has happened. I mean, it's not the army even opposing to that. I mean, in general, they say, well, we're tired of the thing. We have to close it down. The prestige of the United States abroad with that is amazingly going down because people are complaining, as I said before. I mean, we are having this demonstration because of the 12 years, not just here in the United States, but in every main city, in every state are going demonstrations today and tomorrow about these 12 years that Guantanamo was, but also in other countries, like in Latin America, like in Chile, for instance, where I am from, they have big demonstrations there because there's another center being opened in Chile by the U.S. Army or the U.S. Navy even. They have a fort now there in close to Santiago, Chile, where they say it's going to be to train the people there. What kind of training are going to be there?
Well, we've seen with the School of the Americas what kind of training
Exactly.
goes on. But we're unfortunately getting close to the end of our time here, so we're going to close out with a few reminders about upcoming events and announcements, websites you can check out. First of all, again, some important websites to check out for more information about the issues that Mario has been discussing tonight. They're on your screen there, and you can check those out. Also, the event tomorrow night, Guantanamo, an evening to discuss and dissent. Mario is going to be amongst those speaking tomorrow night, along with Candace Gorman, attorney for two of the Guantanamo prisoners, one of whom has been released, and also Dr. Antonio Martinez of the Institute for Survivors of Torture and Human Rights Abuses. That's tomorrow night, 637 South Dearborn Street. And coming up also on the Martin Luther King Day holiday weekend, Sunday, January 19th, Martin Luther King Day celebration public meeting, Hope in an Age of Crisis, reclaiming Dr. King's radical vision for economic equality. And also coming up, we invite you to get involved with the Gay Liberation Network by participating in our monthly meetings, first Wednesday of each month. The next one, of course, Wednesday, February 5th. And our next show here on CAN TV is going to be the second Friday in February, which is Friday, February 14th. And then finally, just a thanks to the people who have made tonight's show possible.